All right, let's start by taking a look at Uttarakhand's new Uniform Civil Code. And as I started by saying, there are broader questions around the Uniform Civil Code. It's been a contentious provision for a long period of time. This was, remember, one of the BJP's three key items on its agenda: the Ram Temple, scrapping Article 370, and a Uniform Civil Code. Now, Article 370 has already been scrapped. The Ram Temple is up there. We saw the Pran Pratishtha a short while back, which is why many people are feeling that maybe the BJP is now going to be turning its attention to the Uniform Civil Code. Maybe after elections, maybe Modi 3.0, that's what the BJP is going to try and introduce. And we'll have to wait for some time to see whether that does happen or doesn't happen. But we'll park that for the moment. So setting the Uniform Civil Code around, there are other aspects that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. Some aspects I'm trying to wrap my head around when it comes to Uttarakhand's new Uniform Civil Code, and in particular, the live-in provision. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. You see, the law makes it compulsory now in Uttarakhand for a couple living together to register their relationship. According to the legislation, individuals in or planning to enter live-in relations will have to register themselves with district officials within a month, failing which they risk facing a jail term of 3 to 6 months and a fine of up to 25,000. Now, at a time when the government is really talking about decriminalization, it's touting the Jan Vishwas bill, talking about how it decriminalizes offences and improves the ease of living, Uttarakhand wants to send people to jail over their relationships if they do not register them with the state. Now, the state government argues that the provision would essentially legitimize live-in relationships and give rights to both parties. So, let's look at a relationship that's already considered legitimate: marriage. Now, in India, a majority of marriages are actually officiated through traditional customs like Phere, or in other religions, Nikah, Anand Karaj, or vows in a church. Now, they're not actually documented always with the marriage registrar's office. So certainly there's no criminalization around this, whether it happens or it doesn't happen. The government doesn't often have a record of who was married and who was not married. The UCC does, of course, push for marriage registrations by deeming couples ineligible for benefits, government benefits, unless they do so. Still, Uttarakhand seems to be more keen to keep records and a tight vigil on relationships outside wedlock by threatening jail in these cases. Another provision that some would consider bizarre makes the declaration of a live-in relationship subject to a registrar's inquiry and approval. And this is a legal hurdle marriage couples don't have to jump through. If you want to marry somebody, you marry them. You don't have to go to a government official and saying, hey, I'm planning to marry this person. Can you inquire and give me your approval because I want to marry this person? But in a live-in relationship in Uttarakhand, it apparently is going to happen. So how will the Uttarakhand government implement such a law? Let's just look at some scenarios. Let's say there's a couple. It has not registered their live-in relationship. They claim they're roommates. Now, how do the officials prove otherwise? Do agencies raid bedrooms in the middle of the night to see what's actually going on? Are they living together, or are they just roommates, watching TV or something like that? Consider other situations. Consider two people living together in a house, sharing rent. Now, one night they get drunk. They get up to some mischief. Whatever. Do they now have to file official government paperwork over that one incident? And from that point onwards, should they be considered that they are living in, or should you not? And there are other provisions in this that are leaving me sort of somewhat baffled as to how it's all going to work out. According to Uttarakhand UCC, for example, the mandatory registration of live-in relations extends to residents of Uttarakhand in a live-in relationship even outside the state. How is this going to be policed? I mean, are you going to have the Dehradun police going door to door in cities like Mumbai and Gurgaon and Bengaluru and Hyderabad and saying, hey, you're a domiciled in Uttarakhand, whom are you living in with, and have you registered it or have you not registered this? Conducting midnight raids in bedrooms all across the country. How is this going to work? Has somebody really thought some of this through? Other questions, what about hostels and dormitories? There are schools and colleges in Uttarakhand. There are schools in Dehradun. Hey, I studied in a school in Dehradun once upon a time. What is the government going to do? Are they going to keep track of student activities in schools and colleges? What's actually happening in those dorms out there? If they are roommates in a college dormitory or they're roommates in a school and they get up to mischief, should that be considered a live-in relationship? Again, something that has to be thought through. Also, people under the age of 21, they need parental consent to register a live-in relationship. What happens if the parent does not consent? Will the government send officers then to stand guard at hostels to ensure that the couple stay apart, or will the students be forced to move out of the hostel, or will they just be arrested? I think it's important to get into these details, because when some of these laws and regulations are brought in, it's important to think this through. Otherwise, it just becomes either a law that is not actually being implemented, or it becomes a law that becomes the focus of rent seeking. Officials will just come and harass people, get money out of them, and that's all that will happen. It's exactly what the issues were when it came to Section 377 some time back. It's not that it was actually being implemented and people were being sent to prison, but it became the grounds for harassment. It became the grounds for the encroachment into individual rights and civil liberties, and none of them were right. And that's the reason why so many people were speaking out against Section 377, and eventually it was repealed, and that was good. So therefore, if new things are happening which could start that entire cycle happening again, we need to think about it a little bit. And talking of Section 377, what about the LGBTQ community? Remember, the Supreme Court read down Section 377 to decriminalize sexual activity between people of the same gender. Now, the law no longer holds homosexual activity to be an unnatural offense which is against the order of nature, so it has been decriminalized. However, the Uttarakhand legislation makes no provision for same-sex couples. It says live-in relationships will not be registered in cases that are against public policy and morality. What exactly does that mean? Same-sex couples, can they live together or can they not live together? Does living together mean that they have to register it, otherwise they're going to risk going to jail, and can they register it? Or is the state going to just ignore their existence? All of this needs to be thought through. And finally, in this particular clause, you can't just break up. If you're living together, you can't just break up. Now, of course, you can't just break up in a marriage also. You have to go through divorce proceedings. But here in this live-in relationship, the Civil Code has a termination clause that requires a couple to submit a written statement in a prescribed format which may invite a police investigation if the reasons cited seem suspicious. I'm just going to say that again in case you think that that's somewhat baffling. It is. If you're in a live-in relationship and you want to break up, you've got to tell the police about it and say we are breaking up. And it is then for the police to decide whether the reasons cited are suspicious or if they are not. If you are arguing, if you dislike each other, if you're fighting about money, whatever is happening in your private, personal life. I think that's the reason I'm going on talking about this, because this should technically be the private, personal life of people. But if the police don't like the reasons that you have given for breaking up, they can launch an investigation. Well, actually, divorce somewhat sounds simpler. Actually, marriage sounds somewhat simpler. And perhaps that's exactly what the government is trying to achieve in the long term, making live-in relationships in Uttarakhand so complicated that couples would rather just get married. That may be where we are headed, but a big question is this what is going to happen across the country? It's Uttarakhand right now, we're raising all of these questions, but are we going to see this in other parts of the country as well? It is certainly worth debating, and that's exactly what we're going to do right now. We're now being joined by Senior Supreme Court Advocate Karuna Nundy and by gender rights activist Deepika Narayan Bharadwaj. Ms. Nundy, why don't I start with you? You know, whatever the merits and demerits of this particular clause are, I guess the first thing which we have to wrap our head around is, how is it actually going to be enforced? Are you going to have the policeman walking into people's houses in the middle of the night to see, are you roommates or are you living together? And what exactly are you doing? Is that how it's going to actually operate on the ground?
You know, what's interesting is that when there were provisions in the US banning homosexual sex, that it was on this issue, the fact that the police can't come into your house and decide what you're doing on the grounds of privacy. That was one of the major grounds on which the law was struck down. So in this country, of course, we have a very robust right to privacy. There is Puttaswamy. And what that says, and it's a 9-judge bench, and what that says, the Supreme Court says, that there is no question of intimate decision-making being interfered with by the state, whether it's on the grounds of honor, and they say so explicitly, or whether it's on any other grounds. Of course, this is underpinned always because when we speak of intimate decision-making, we speak of the ability of the individual person to make decisions. So obviously, this is based on consent, it is based on bodily autonomy, it is based on all of these factors, all of these freedoms that every individual carries with them, regardless of who they are and where they are. So when it comes to marital rape, for example, or when it comes to, then people say that, oh, but why should law be in the bedroom? You cannot have, privacy ends where bodily autonomy begins, you see? So you can't kill your wife in the bedroom. You can't molest your wife in the bedroom. So therefore, you also, can't rape your wife in the bedroom.
All right, Ms. Bharadwaj, let me get your overall perception of this live-in clause. How is it going to be managed is the question all of us are asking. What does it also mean for privacy? What, for example, if your roommates deciding to sleep together? What if your roommates not living together, but one night you get drunk and get up to mischief? From now onwards, are you in a live-in relationship? And also, more specifically, the question of criminalization, which I think is the real issue here.
Vikram, at the outset, I think I agree to what Ms. Nundy said. I don't know how this is going to be regulated. Two individuals who are adults can decide about their life, whether they want to live, for how long they want to live together, and if they want to move out. The essence of a live-in relationship is that two people are coming together because they do not want to go through the rigmaroles of a married institution. There's no certain commitment as such, but they're exploring whether they want to live their life together for a longer time or not. It may turn into a marriage or it may not turn into a marriage. It's essentially called a live-in, live-out relationship. This is essentially comes from the West, in my understanding, but over there, wherever live-in relationships are legalized, I tried to read, but there aren't regulations the way we are bringing it in India.
Ms. Bharadwaj, I've had some people saying that the way it is worded, it's almost, simpler to get married and divorced than it is to actually be in a live-in relationship now, because if you're breaking up, for example, you don't necessarily have the police coming and doing an investigation and the possibility of being thrown into prison if you're doing something wrong.
Well, I kind of sort of disagree with you on that. If a marriage breaks down, you have to go through a divorce, and that's a longer procedure as well. Here, you can move out, but then there are repercussions only for the man, because he has to pay maintenance to the woman he was in live-in relationship with. The law says if he deserts her. If you have not registered the live-in relationship, there are, of course, criminal provisions. But like you said, yes, if you do not register a marriage under the UCC in Uttarakhand, there is, I think, only fine. So it's definitely tough. More than that, Vikram, it's going to really bring hesitation in people if they really want to get into a live-in relationship. The whole concept of live-in relationship was that you're making an individual choice. Your parents do not necessarily need to be involved in that. But here you are bringing registration process. It is mandatory.
Ms. Nundy, do you think this live-in clause is going to be challenged in any way? And you said at the Supreme Court, for example, there are already rulings on privacy. It could be challenged on that. Could it be on the grounds of fundamental liberties and fundamental rights and the question of criminalization? Where do you see this headed?
It could be challenged on a variety of grounds. It's not just on the grounds of privacy. It's also on the grounds of freedom, So what a person does with their body is really their own decision as long as it's consensual, right? So that is something that is increasingly underpinning laws concerning these a variety of relationships. Joseph Shine, of course, the where the adultery provision was struck down is something that the current dispensation has sought to bring back in the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, but also with a variety of other intimate issues. But there's something that also I think the framers must know, which is that if they are seeking to protect the woman with regard to maintenance, actually the domestic violence laws already apply. They're civil laws, as they should be. They say that if you live in a shared household together, and if there is violence, so of a variety in a variety of ways, then you can get the benefit of a shared of a right to residence. You can get maintenance. You can get a variety of things. So therefore, this law is entirely misguided. Also, what was somewhat amusing for me is that they seem to have brought in, unwittingly perhaps, a recognition of live-in relationships by queer couples. Because the law says whosoever, it doesn't say man and woman, right? There's one place where it says S/he, but it doesn't make clear that it has to be two people of the opposite sex. So frankly, if they took away the criminal provision, the criminalization of it, and they made it something like a civil partnership and included anyone who wanted to be in a civil partnership, that would be a very correct and progressive thing to do. That does not appear to be what they are in fact doing, though.
Well, Bharadwaj, that was an interesting perspective. So, if the intention is to actually protect people who are in a live-in relationship, and let's give the benefit of the doubt to the Uttarakhand government and say, look, all they're trying to do is there should be some maintenance, there should be some rights, there should be some protection for people in a live-in relationship. Now, if that's the intention, then it's not that difficult to change this a little bit so that you keep the good and throw away the bad. You should just decriminalize it, for example, not make it compulsory or mandatory, say that this is an option that is given to people in live-in relationship, that they can register it, and then XYZ benefits flow from that. That's the logical, simple way to take it forward.
Vikram, I personally feel there has to be a framework somewhere. Some rules definitely define and make things better in any society. Live-in relationships are a growing reality in India and across the world. There are certain frameworks within the civil laws to, sort of rule these relationships. So till that place, it is fine. I think non-registration and having that criminalized is something that is definitely questionable. Second thing is, of course, violation of right to privacy. Of course, we'll have to see if this gets challenged, what the court says. Something that I personally, with the cases that I deal on a daily basis, what I feel what has happened is going to be good at a larger level is that there were a lot of rape allegations that were coming out of live-in relationships where the woman said that the man had promised to marry her. He's not marrying her, and she ended up charging him with rape. If there is a registration, then at least such kind of allegations would not be made out because you are willingly submitting to a live-in relationship.
All right, Ms. Nundy, a last quick word from you. It's very possible that UCC is going to start rolling out in other states and maybe after the elections across the country. Do you think this sort of a provision is going to be there then in the UCC elsewhere as well?
I hope not. It's hard to tell. This is a particularly egregious provision, which is why everyone is talking about it. But also, I think there was a missed opportunity by the Supreme Court in the queer marriage, in the marriage equality case, because one of the challenges was to the Special Marriage Act notice provision, right? Which is that you have to put a notice saying if you are an interfaith or intercaste, etc. couple, which is typically the kinds of couples that get married under the Special Marriage Act, to say that you intend to get married. That was argued by one side, but that was not unfortunately decided by the court, right? Now, this is actually a similar provision, which is that if you are just living together, say your family doesn't want you to get married, and you say, okay, I'm a little hesitant to get married without my family's approval, so I'm going to live together. On pain of criminal penalty, you have to register that living together. Then the impact on vigilante groups is going to be very significant, in terms of legitimizing that. And given also the rise of the legislations prohibiting interfaith marriages, then somewhere in the mind of the executing police officer, there is the idea that, oh, this is illegal anyway, and what the vigilante groups is only are doing is only enforcing the law. Right. Even though all of it is very fuzzy thinking. So there is a huge danger there. And this provision, I really hope it goes.
All right, Ms. Nundy, Ms. Bharadwaj, thank you both so much for being with us. You know, a really interesting provision, I guess interesting is the word, in the Uttarakhand UCC. Let's see where it actually goes. I mean, hopefully it will not be taken to those worst extents of policemen going around, knocking down people's doors, not just in Uttarakhand, but all over the country, saying, what exactly is happening in your bedroom? Are you sleeping together or are you not? Let's hope it doesn't come to that. And let's hope that better wisdom prevails. That's, as we've been discussing, there are very simple ways in which this could become an enabling provision which gives rights to people without actually impinging either privacy or having criminalization. That would be the logical way to go. But let's see where we actually end up on that particular point.